Hello listeners, hello video viewers, welcome back to my podcast. This is episode number 867 and it's a conversation episode, which means that you'll hear me in conversation with a guest. So what I'm going to do here at the beginning is just give you a quick introduction to explain some of the sort of main concepts being discussed in the conversation. Then you can hear the conversation and then I'll come back at the end to kind of ramble a little bit, maybe in response to things you heard. And also I want to just talk a little bit about some of the comments that I received in response to the last episode of this podcast, which was all about getting 1 million subscribers on YouTube, which I still can't quite believe is true, but apparently it is. And it's still at 1 million, which is nice. So let me now just read from the notes that I prepared for the introduction to this episode. You'll be able to, if you want to read these notes, you can find them on the page for this episode on my website. Just follow the link in the description and you can just read the stuff that I'm reading from here. So this episode is a conversation all about multimodality in communication. Multimodal communication. What's that? You might be thinking. Well, of course, that will be explained by my guest, but I'm also going to try and break it down for you here in the introduction in just a moment. My guest is Nik Peachey, who will introduce himself to you in a few minutes when the conversation part of this episode begins. But let me just give you some background information about how this episode came about, first of all, and then what the main topic of conversation is, what multimodality is. Okay, so first of all, a couple of months ago, sort of late last year, I was contacted by Oxford University Press, OUP. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They publish materials and books. They have an English language teaching department. In fact, I spoke to the head of the English language teaching department of Oxford University Press on this podcast last year, about a year ago. But anyway, OUP, what they do is they publish academic materials for English teachers and English learners. So that means course books, things like, the Headway series and English File, but also teacher training materials and other academic work about the teaching of English. Okay. And what they've done recently is that they've published a paper about multimodality in English language teaching, and they wanted to see if I was interested in doing an interview with one of the people involved in the writing of this paper. The paper is called Multimodality in English Language Teaching, Communication Skills for Today's Generation, right? So that's the title of this paper that they're publishing. To be honest, the paper is really for the English teaching community, for English teachers and people working in the English language teaching industry, right? But it's definitely interesting, and it's definitely interesting for English learners as well. Okay, so after I got that email, multimodality in English language teaching, Luke, do you want to have a conversation with one of the people who helped to write this paper? I thought to myself, multimodality, that's a nice word, isn't it? Sounds interesting. Also, I was aware of Nik Peachey already because he's a fairly well-known figure in the world of English language teaching and publishing, especially in the UK. He's a name that you see at things like teaching conferences or in teacher training. So I was aware of Nik Peachey already. So I replied to Oxford University Press and I said I was interested. They sent me a copy of the paper that they've published, and we arranged this interview, which actually took place a couple of months ago. I think it was even in November. It turned out to be really interesting and a very wide-ranging conversation about so many things, all related to what communication really means and what the various aspects are, which are part of communication these days. So let's just consider the title of this paper again: Multimodality in English Language Teaching, Communication Skills for Today's Generation. So basically, this is all about how, as teachers, we always need to be aware of the ways in which learners of English need to use English to communicate in the world today. Okay, this involves looking at communication and considering how that happens, and also considering changes in technology and how they are having an effect on the way that we communicate. So how do we communicate, right? Think about this. How do we actually communicate? Is it just through language? Is it just reading, writing, listening and speaking? And also, how is our communication affected by technology and the way that technology is advancing? Now, what Oxford University Press are saying with this paper is that more and more our communication is multimodal, which means that we communicate in a variety of different ways or different modes. And this is not just in terms of the 4 linguistic skills of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. That is traditionally how communication has been defined, right? 4 skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Now, those are all linguistic or verbal modes, meaning that they are language-based in words. But there are more communication modes than that, including non-verbal ones, which are still hugely important. This includes body language, but there's a lot more than that, especially when you consider how much of our communication is mediated through technology these days. So to try and break this down, okay, let's think about this in 2 areas. You've got social interactions, that's the way that we speak and listen to each other face to face, right, sort of social communication. And then the way that we consume media, right? That's the way that we consume things like video or audio or texts, okay? And there's also how those 2 things, social interactions and media, there's also the way that those 2 things combine, they blend together more and more as we use media to communicate. You know, we write texts, we write emails, we do video calls, and also we create media more and more. We combine text, images, video and audio to do things like create social media posts. Okay, so we're communicating in the sort of traditional sense, socially. We're also consuming communication through media, and we're also kind of making our own media more and more as we share things like, you know, images and create different types of social media posts. All right, so let's consider those 2 areas then, social interactions and media. And let's think about how they are multimodal, how they involve many different forms of communication. And I'm saying this all to you at in the introduction here, just to try to put you in the right headspace so that you can really follow the conversation and really get the most from it. Now, in terms of social interactions, right, there's verbal communication. That's the words that we're using, right, in speaking and writing and listening and reading. But if it's social interactions, it's probably going to be speaking and listening. Maybe you're writing emails and stuff. But anyway, there's the verbal communication. But also, there's body language. There are facial expressions. There's gestures. There's your appearance, right, which definitely communicates a certain message. There's physical proximity as well, like, you know, things like where you stand in relation to the other person. Also, cultural factors come into play, such as things like pop culture references that we use when we communicate, or different codes of behavior in different cultures. And to communicate successfully, we need to have an awareness of those different sort of non-verbal and social factors. All right? Maybe I need to give an example. So let me try and give an example now of how I have to consider these things as an English teacher talking to my class. Okay, so I'm just picking one example of a social interaction and looking at the way in which that is in fact multimodal. It's not just verbal, it's not just linguistic, it's not just about the words, the vocabulary, the grammar and the pronunciation, that there are these other forms of communication going on as well. So as an English teacher, before I go into a classroom, I do have to, you know, bear in mind certain things, and while I'm teaching I have to think about certain things, and I've become more and more conscious of these extra modes of communication and try to use them to help me do my job properly. Okay, for example, body language. What I'm trying to communicate to my class of students is that I am attentive, right, that I'm listening, that I'm aware and that I'm available, so that my body language reflects that. Also, I want to show that I'm professional, right, which means that I try and sit up straight. I try not to slump in my chair or sit in a manner which might be considered unprofessional, so I have to try and sit up straight, but also, you know, hold my body open so that I'm always aware of every single person in the classroom. Okay, in terms of facial expressions, I have to I use my facial expressions to show that I'm listening to someone, or, you know, so that you adopt a sort of open facial expression. Or if I'm showing to my learners that, for example, something is incorrect English or something we don't say, I'll probably frown or try and express the emotion of, no, I don't think that's correct. Because that actually is a really, really, really effective form of communication, especially when you're dealing with learners whose level isn't that high. You need to make everything very, very clear. So you really employ all of these things, all the body language, facial expressions, gestures as well. Gestures, we might not think about it, but we do actually use a lot of things like hand gestures or other things. Even just like, if I stick my thumb out, if a student has said something correctly and I just give them a thumbs up, obviously that means good. That's good. Well done. There are other gestures as well. Like, for example, we do in the UK, there is the gesture of making a sort of an OK sign, a circle with your thumb and finger. But in some cultures, that's considered rude. That's something. So I don't do OK, meaning the circle with my thumb and finger. I actually don't do that anymore. It's always just a thumbs up, because I think thumbs up is universal. So I have to consider those things as well. Also, my appearance communicates a really important message, especially, for example, on the first day of a new course. I've got a group of students, they're all new, they've all paid their money, they've all come to the classroom, and they are, making certain assumptions about me as a teacher in our first interactions. And it's not just about the things I'm saying to them, it's about the way I look. In fact, this broadcasts to them perhaps the most important messages. So I do need to consider the way I dress. Now, when I'm podcasting, I actually dress a lot more casually than I do when I'm teaching in a classroom. I say a lot more casually. It's not that much of a difference. As a teacher, I generally will wear a shirt. Maybe if it's cold, I'll wear a sort of a woolen sweater. But I'll wear a shirt and I'll wear a pair of black shoes. I wear jeans these days. Maybe I'll wear a pair of chinos or something. But it's a shirt which I've ironed. I've tried to iron it well. Hopefully it's not too creased. But basically, I want to look sort of professional, because obviously this is a professional context, my classroom. So I want to look professional. I want to look like I've made an effort. I want to look like I'm being reasonably serious, and fairly smart. And with that sort of slightly more formal dress code, it's not completely formal. I'm not wearing a suit. I'm not wearing a tie. But when you go in that direction of the more formal clothing, it becomes more business-like, more impersonal, more professional. So I do wear a shirt, black shoes, okay? But I'm not in the full business clothing, not full business attire, because I also want to show that this is a relaxed situation. It's a fairly casual situation. To an extent, it's a sort of informal situation too. I don't want to make everything too impersonal, because learning a language is actually a personal process. I want people to feel relaxed and comfortable. So I try to communicate the message of, I'm professional, but I'm also, quite casual and relaxed about this too. I want to create the right kind of atmosphere, the right environment that will facilitate language learning. Okay, and that does mean that the students feel that they're in safe hands, that they've got a professional in front of them, but also that they feel fairly relaxed, like this isn't super serious, and that they can kind of be themselves and also be a bit more personal as well in their approach in the classroom. Okay, physical proximity also comes into effect, because when I'm, for example, there's a difference between me walking forwards. If I'm talking to the whole class, there's a difference between me taking a couple of steps forwards towards the class and taking a couple of steps back away from the class. Right, this is sort of unconscious, really. I don't quite know how to explain it, but walking forwards, definitely you get people's attention. If you just take a couple of steps forward, you definitely get their attention. So you can do that to emphasize a certain point, for example, to emphasize that a conclusion that you're making about like a grammar point that you're teaching. And you might step back in order to kind of encourage the learners to perhaps take part a bit more, or to sort of, in a way, open up the floor, as if to say to them, okay, I'm expecting you to speak now. And stepping back seems to somehow allow that to happen. These are all subconscious things that I've learned through experience. Like your position, the way you stand, the way you move, and while you're saying certain things. So I guess through experience, I've learned all of these other modes of communication. I've learned to be aware of them and to control them to an extent. And I do think that I use those things to fairly good effect as a teacher, right? I've got to the point where I'm quite comfortable in a classroom, and I'm sort of like able to control the room to an extent, right? Certainly more than at the very beginning of my career, when I was unable to control those things. I couldn't control my voice very well. I couldn't control my body language. I couldn't really command the attention of the room and do it in a relaxed way to put all the students at ease. I couldn't do that at the beginning. It took time. Anyway, so that's just an example of multimodal communication in a social context. And I picked the example of teaching, but there are obviously many other situations. Teaching is a bit like presenting sometimes, but there's also other situations, of course, as well, like, just conversations, when you're mingling in a group with other people, if you're just standing there drinking coffee with some people, So obviously there are many, many different social situations, but all of these different modes come into effect. So that's the first area, social interactions. The second area that I'm talking about here is the way multimodality relates to how we consume media. For example, if you watch some video content online, this means understanding the various ways in which that media is constructed. Again, it's not just the words that are being used in this video, it's all the other stuff, right? So how certain visual elements are important, the use of certain tropes in video making, the use of different fonts, right? If there's text on the screen, the choice of font does actually affect the meaning that's being communicated to an extent. Different colors also have different associations, different editing techniques that are being used, music which is being played in the background, the choice of images which are being shown to you, and the way those images are being put together. Now, understanding these things allows us to decode the media we consume, and this is crucial in understanding things like the intentions behind the content we're exposed to, and our ability to detect things like misinformation in videos that we're seeing, right? For example, if you show a certain online video to someone who has very little multimodal awareness, right? Someone who is not familiar or not literate in all of the different modes of communication that happen with video, for example. So if you show some online video to someone who is not versed in all those things, like, for example, your grandmother or something, I'm assuming that your grandmother doesn't spend a lot of time on the internet looking at sort of online videos on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, right? So your grandmother probably isn't aware of all of these different, standards of communication, okay? So if you did show a video like that to your grandmother, then I think it would probably be the case that she would be completely confused by what she was seeing, or she would experience some sort of culture shock. She just wouldn't really, you know what I mean? Imagine, for example, playing a video of Davey504 on YouTube. I don't know if you're familiar with Davey504, but he is an extremely successful YouTuber who makes very distinctive and funny videos about playing the bass guitar. Okay, and his videos are full of memes, right? These little visual jokes and things, just absolutely full of that sort of thing, and edited in a very distinctive way. Right? Now, if you showed one of his videos to your grandmother, I genuinely think that she probably would not know what was going on, right? And that's because she just isn't familiar with all the different codes being used. You see? So it's important, I think, to have a level of multimodal literacy so that you can properly understand the media you're consuming, but also so that you can communicate successfully yourself through media, because we also are content creators more and more. right? When we do things like create social media posts that combine sound, video, text, and designs. Now, Nik Peachey is going to give you various examples of all these things during the conversation, which should help to clarify all of this for you further. So I really hope you enjoy the conversation. One note about the sound quality. Now, I predict that when you start listening to this conversation, that some of you will want to comment that you found it hard to hear Nik or to understand Nik. Okay, that's just my prediction. Now, this is because Nik is not using a podcasting or broadcasting microphone, which might make it a little bit hard to hear him at first. It'll take you a little while to adjust. He's using just the microphone in his Bluetooth headphones, I think, so you can hear some of the sounds of the room around him. There's a bit of echo and a bit of reverb, which might make it a little bit harder for you to pick up every word he's saying, certainly at the beginning, because you might need to adjust your ears at the start of this conversation, but you will get used to it. Okay, so your first impression might be, oh, that's difficult, difficult to understand, because he's not using a broadcast microphone. But to be honest, it's exactly the sort of sound quality that you would expect from a typical like Zoom video call, or the average sort of video conference where most people don't speak into a microphone, like a kind of a heavy broadcast microphone. That's not how most people speak in videos, right? I mean, you must be well aware of that. You must have had Zoom meetings where people have got like different sound setups, and most people are just speaking into the inbuilt microphone on their computers. Maybe they've got Bluetooth headphones or something, but usually the sound quality is like less than perfect. Okay, and so that's just normal. So I don't, if Nik is watching this, this is not a comment about your sound setup. For me, it was absolutely fine, and I understood everything. I'm just kind of trying to warn my listeners that their first impression might be, can't understand it. All right, just keep listening. It'll get better and better as you get used to the sound conditions. And also for me, this conversation got more and more interesting as Nik and I got to know each other better, and we got really into the whole subject of communication in its various modes. I hope you enjoy it too, listeners, and that it makes you think about how learning English can be about more than just learning words and grammar. Okay, so I'll speak to you again a little bit at the end of the conversation, but now let's meet my guest and let's start listening to my conversation about multimodal communication. And here we go. Nik Peachey, hello, welcome onto my podcast. How are you today?
Great, thanks. It's great to be here. It's a nice, different experience for me. A kind of a multimodal experience as well.
Absolutely, it is, yeah.
Early.
Yeah, we're going to talk about multimodality and learning English and teaching English today. We've never actually spoken before, but our paths have crossed, in fact.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so at the 2016 British Council Elton Awards ceremony, you won an award, right? You won the award What was the award that you won?
I won the award for teacher resources, innovation in teacher resources, and that was for a book I wrote actually on digital video, which kind of, again, links into this kind of theme as well.
Yeah. So I was there at the ceremony because my podcast got nominated in the digital innovation category, I think.
Oh, great.
So I was nominated, sort of thinking, is it at all possible that I could win this? I didn't.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience. I mean, I've been there as a winner and as I wouldn't say a loser, because getting nominated is great, but as a kind of runner-up, and as well, and it's kind of a bit of an interesting experience both ways.
Kind of like the Oscars for English teaching, sort of. So I saw you getting the award. You made a speech and stuff. We didn't actually speak, but anyway, we have actually been in the same room before.
That's great. Here's to the next time, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So Nik, before we start talking about multimodality and the things that you have to say about that and so on, maybe just for the benefit of my audience who are learners of English around the world who might be less familiar with you than, for example, teachers of English, can you just tell us about yourself a bit? Are you a teacher? Are you an English teacher?
Well, I always think of myself as a teacher, and originally I got into what I'm doing now through English teaching. I was a teacher and started teaching 30 years ago, teaching English. Before that, I was actually a guitar teacher, and I taught the guitar in a prison close to where I live now.
In a prison?
Yeah, I taught my first teaching experiences was teaching prisoners in a prison, teaching them to play the guitar. And
Wow.
that got me interested in teaching and, and the impact it can have on people's lives as well. And I went into English teaching and started teaching in a number of different countries. I taught in Egypt for a while and Tunisia, Morocco, Spain, Italy, Singapore, Ukraine. I moved around a bit.
Yeah.
And then I kind of gravitated into teacher training and got interested in training other teachers and developing materials. And so now mostly what I do these days is teaching, teacher training and materials development and sort of developing ideas. And so it involves a lot of writing and a lot of online work as well, doing things like this, only with kind of large groups of teachers very
Yeah.
often.
Kind of leading seminars and things, and giving presentations about teaching and so on. Okay, so right, teacher training and writing about English teaching. Is there something that you're particularly interested in at the moment? What's the current thing that you're kind of into?
Well, I think one of my main interests at the moment is multimodality and multimodal learning and sort of looking at multimodal texts. And that's something that I've been interested in for a while. And that interest has kind of developed, I think, as the kind of ways we communicate have developed as well.
What is multimodality then? Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Multimodality really is about communicating through different modes, and often we're communicating through these different modes simultaneously. I mean, I'm speaking to you now, and we're using voice to communicate, so there's an element of of words, but also, there's this element of body language. I can see you, I can see you're nodding, and that's communicating a message to me too. And when you can probably see my hands moving. I'm sort of using gestures as well, so those include some kind of meaning as well. And I'm looking at your background and sort of interpreting different things about your background there. I can see Luke's English podcast in the background, so I'm analysing text as well and developing my understanding of the context around our communication. And that's what I guess your listeners or viewers will be doing as well. They're seeing these two people, how they communicate, and what's involved there.
Okay, so is this new? Is this does this reflect sort of new things in the ways that we communicate these days, or is this just like always? Is it always been this way?
I think there are elements that are new and there are elements that are changing. Traditionally, especially when it comes to teaching languages and teaching communication, often what we've looked at is different things in isolation. You learn how to listen, and you have your headphones on and you only listen. You learn how to speak and interact with a person, usually physically. You learn how to read, and when you learn how to read, you just have a text. But that's become much more complex now because often we don't have those kind of individual modes in isolation. Because we're communicating through digital means, and those things have been combined within those means. Then it's become much more complex. Like the idea that we could have this conversation, face to face across many miles, just 10, 20 years ago was almost unthinkable. When I first started teaching in the 90s, just getting a phone call from Egypt to my family in Britain was a major ordeal.
Yeah.
It was a difficult thing to do, making an international phone call, and very expensive. But now we're having these kind of, these video conversations and across the world, and for free most of the time.
Mm,
So that's
mm.
one aspect that's changed, I think. And another aspect that's changed is, okay, we've been watching video and we've been watching film for a long time. but now we're able to produce it. The concept of being able to produce a video that had complex text moving around it, background music, different people interacting, being able to do that yourself in your own home, 20 years ago was unthinkable. You needed a studio, you needed expensive cameras, you needed all kinds of equipment, and then you needed an editing suite and experts to edit it for you. And now, my daughter, who's coming up to 9, does this sort of thing on my phone. It seems like an incredible leap forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we are more and more able to use all this sort of multimedia stuff just on a daily basis as we produce communication, but also receiving it too. Yeah. We think of my audience, but also just everyone now with their phones, using the internet. The way that people can consume English, for example, it's not just finding something to listen to or something to watch, but there's, with different platforms like Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and so on. Yeah, there's this complex interplay of the visual, the spoken word, and also the written word, all combining all at the same time, and it's all very seamless as well.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And often, it's not only seamless, but it's something that we've become very familiar with. In a lot of ways, we don't even think about it. And I guess, developing multimodal literacy is about thinking about it. It's about being a bit more analytical about what you're seeing and viewing and hearing, the way those things work together, and developing a kind of deeper understanding of them. I think that. And that's part of, when you're viewing them, that's part of being able to produce them as well. Because, once you understand those things and how they work, you're able to produce them in a much better way too, I think.
Yeah. And I can sort of imagine in the future, with the way that technology is becoming more and more part of our daily lives, and just the interactions we have, I can imagine with things like augmented reality, right? Where maybe one day we'll have our glasses on or something that will allow us to see text or other icons or something just as we look around the world. If you're walking down the high street, you might see different things. And I also think about the way that we text as well. We communicate by text so much, and that involves writing words, but also using emojis, and maybe using things like memes as well, little images that have little jokes in them, combinations of like images or GIFs or GIFs, whatever you want to call it, moving images with text involved. Sometimes there's sound, sometimes there isn't. And we're sharing and communicating with these things all the time. It's really, really sort of, becoming a normal part of our lives and the way we communicate. Multimodal, right? Multimodal then. So many different modes of communication all at the same time.
That's
right. What about those modes then? Because how do we define the modes of communication? Are we talking about the 4 skills like listening, reading, writing, and speaking, or what?
Well, we are talking about them, but we're also sort of broadening that definition. There are more, and there are different ones that are combined. There's a sort of linguistic element to it, in that there's written words and spoken words, but also a visual element in it. Both visual in the way that we visually communicate with our bodies, but also when you look at words, for example. You see different fonts, you see different designs, and the way they're used in design can impact your understanding of them or your perceptions of them, as well. So there's that visual aspect. There's also the kind of visual aspect in terms of, looking at people and how they interact together. Within some cultures, people stand very closely together. In other cultures, they're much further apart. So that element of proximity is something that you need to understand. There's also, hearing and listening to their voices. It's not just about understanding words, but sort of thinking about tones, different accents, and what they imply as well. So there are a lot of different aspects to it that we can look into more deeply.
Right. And adding that to the kind of changes in technology that are affecting the way we communicate, you've got all those other levels as well to take into account.
That's right.
Yeah. So what do you think? Does this mean that people need to rethink the way that they learn English or the way that they teach English?
I think I'm not sure that they need to rethink it, but they need to. I think we need to think more broadly about it, so that we're aware of more things, and that we're recognizing more things. That we're not just concentrating on, is this the right grammar? Is this the right vocabulary? But understanding that those things exist within a much wider context of communication. So, we need to start thinking about that a lot more, and perhaps about what messages are being sent to us as well. Because when we watch something in a video, the message isn't just in the words, and the message isn't always just what it appears to be. We hear a lot about sort of fake news and different ways of advertising, and now artificial intelligence can replicate you and use your voice and your appearance
I know, it's a nightmare.
to produce a different message. We need to start thinking very carefully about those things and being much more analytical about the message we're receiving. Not just in the language we're learning, but in our own language as well. And I think, multimodal literacy can help to with your first language as well, and understand things that are going on in your first language too in that way.
Are there different processes related to learning multimodal literacy? I mean, how does that work?
I think there are sort of some interesting techniques that teachers can use and students can use to sort of build their understanding of what's happening. So, for example, something that I love to do, if you watch a video, if you're watching a video clip, before you watch it, turn the sound off and watch it for the first time without the sound, and see how much you can pick up from it. How much can you understand just by, maybe the way people are using their hands, or maybe the interactions to people, their face, their facial expressions when they're communicating, what you can pick up from the context and the way we interact. Just by watching first before you listen, you can pick up an awful lot of information. And then the second time, listen to it with the sound on and see if you can check and understand what's happening there. So sort of build up your ability to be a very, accurate and precise observer. I think that's very important.
Separate the levels of, the different modes. Separate them out so you're able to sort of focus on them independently and understand that there are different sort of levels of communication going on. And then that allows you to notice those things more easily when they're all happening at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. You build by learning how to do those things. You build up your awareness. So when you go out into the kind of real world, or the real world of the internet, and you see these things, you start thinking about them more regularly.
Okay.
I think another example is that we see a lot of infographics online now, and so infographics are like a combination of images used with sort of bits of text and icons, and they usually communicate quite dense information. And it's a great medium. It's a bit like a sort of online poster, if you like, with lots of information in it. And I think sort of looking at those and thinking about, okay, why have they used that color? What's that color trying to tell us? What's that use of font? How would it be different with a different font? Why that style of graphics? Those kind of things can help us kind of analyze that as well.
Very interesting. You've written, or you've been involved in the writing of a paper by Oxford University Press.
That's right.
Yeah, it's called Multimodality in English Language Teaching. What's that about? Well, it's pretty obvious from the title, I guess.
Yeah, that's about multimodality and sort of the changes, the things we've been talking about, the changes that are taking place in communication, and it's mainly directed at teachers and helping teachers to sort of think about these things and how they teach them in their classroom. And along with that, there's a toolkit, and the toolkit is something that I wrote, and there's sort of a collection of different tasks that teachers can try and use with their students to help, build their awareness and develop their skills in multimodal literacy.
Yeah, I noticed that because I've been looking at the paper, and at the end of the paper there is there's an appendix, right? I guess that's where the toolkit is. Is that right?
No, the toolkit is actually a separate document, I think.
Oh, is it? Okay. But in the appendix, what did I notice? 5 key questions of media literacy, and it says learners should be encouraged to ask themselves these 5 questions each time they encounter a multimodal text, such as a meme, a social media post, an infographic, a viral video, a vlog, etc., in order to be able to evaluate and analyze media. I don't know if you remember the 5 questions.
I've got the 5 key questions. So the first one is who created this message? Whenever you read something or whether you watch something, think about who created it. Is it the person who's actually in it? Because, often, for example, a TikTok video may have, has someone in. It's not necessarily the person who created it, and then what creative techniques are used to attract your attention? How are they grabbing your attention with it? This could be through bold lettering, it could be through music, or it could be through motion or an image or something like that.
Often you see things like jump cuts in videos, especially short form content. So
that's right.
my content's not short form. In fact, often it's like too long, probably. But you see with things like the very attention grabbing stuff that you see on certainly on platforms like TikTok, which really trade in that kind of attention grabbing stuff, because there's always each video is just a thumb swipe away. Someone just gets bored, they just swipe away from it. And so, a lot of the editing techniques are used to hold people's attention. That's like jump cuts where suddenly the image is much closer to you and then it's further away. And this is often used to punctuate a sentence, which is quite interesting. So where normally with our voice, we would sort of use sentence stress or intonation or bits of body language to kind of punctuate our sentences and to make them more attention grabbing. It's interesting the way that video makers are using these quick jump cuts and changes in the size of the image and so on, and then sudden changes in the background color or other things. Yes, okay.
Or text popping out at you or something like that to grab your attention. And there's, you have to think about that relationship between the text and what you're actually watching, because, it should be helping you to understand that, but often it can be deceptive as well. So there are lots of different things going on with that. So there's a sort of number of different creative techniques. And the third question is, how might different people understand the message differently to me? Because we just see things from our own perspective, but other people might see something very different in that, particularly people from a different culture, so getting people to think about that. Whose perspective is it made from, and how could we see that differently?
Yeah, this is really interesting in the sense that, kind of battling against online misinformation and the the way that online media works, it's sort of changed so rapidly over the last 10 years even, or 10 to 15 years, that it's almost like the human race is kind of catching up with the techniques that are being used on us every day. It's really important that people understand the way that kind of we get psychologically manipulated by the content that we're shown.
That's right. So much of what we're shown now, especially, is actually advertising. Although it doesn't say, it doesn't portray itself as advertising. A lot of it's advertising for something, or it's trying to convince us of something, or trying to make us understand something. There's no kind of, everything has a motive. I mean, and that's really, that's the biggest question, really, and that's the number 5 question. I know we've jumped number 4, but the number 5 question is, why is this message being sent? Why is this person putting it up there? Okay, I know a lot of people maybe on TikTok or on social media, they're doing it to try and make a living, but beyond, there's a deeper question than that. There's a deeper reason than that, isn't it? It's not just about, okay, I'm trying to make a few bob and pay the rent. It's there's another message there, especially, there might be a political message there. There might be a marketing message there. Maybe there's a kind of lifestyle message there that they want to convince you of.
Right. So being kind of literate in this multimodal sense is also, about using critical thinking and understanding.
Yeah, that's right.
The purpose, the motivation behind that kind of content. Often, what do you think? What could be some of the motivations behind the creation of videos that you might see on social media, for example? What are some of the different motivations?
Well, a lot of them might be marketing to sell something. Often people are trying to sell us stuff, or it could be sort of change your political views, or make you believe something that might well be true. It might be very informative, but it might be somebody's perspective on the truth that is, that isn't sort of the reality, or may not be your reality. There are a lot of people talk about sort of different culture wars that are going on at the moment, and persuading people that, different cultures are correct or incorrect, or, it could be, it could actually be proselytizing and trying to get you to convert to a different religion. That people have all kinds of motives for producing content.
I think there's a sort of an understanding or a kind of a myth that gets perpetuated a lot, which is that online media is somehow more authentic and more truthful than quote unquote mainstream media, right? That stuff that you see on television on one of the major television channels is being sort of mediated, or has a kind of an agenda to it, a kind of mainstream agenda or something. Whereas if it's just a video that you are watching on social media that's been produced by someone in their home, that is therefore more authentic, and then as a result more truthful. But it's not necessarily the case that we can be easily duped by online media, which appears to be authentic, but is also just as motivated by an agenda as something you might see on a major TV channel.
Yeah, of course, and I think, I don't want to knock the major news channels and things like that, because there's a whole bunch of people, there producing stuff and checking that it's the truth, or at least bears some resemblance to the truth. But I think it's still good to question those as well. Going back to an American poet from the last century, Walt Whitman, said that you should question everything. Question everything. Question your leaders. Question your religious leaders. Question everything you see, and reject anything that insults your soul, which is a nice expression. But so this element of the potential to be deceived isn't something that's particularly new. Throughout history, powerful people, powerful organizations have attempted to control what you understand, what you read, what you think. But I think now, even the person sitting in their front room, with their iPhone, can attempt to do the same thing through various social media. So we have to be that much more careful and that much more critical in the way that we view it and think about it. I think particularly nowadays, because of the kind of algorithms that a lot of social media run on, if you look at something that reinforces your own beliefs, and you look at it for long enough, social media knows, algorithms know that that's what you like, and so they just keep sending you more of that stuff. So your any biases you might have become perpetually reinforced because you're seeing much more stuff every time you go and look on social media. There's another thing that convinces me that I'm right. So I think it's a very good thing to go and look for stuff from the opposite point of view to your own. And then you'll get some of that in your feed as well. But you'll see other people's points of view. However much you might disagree with them, it's worth thinking about them. And it's worth thinking about, what makes people believe that, and I think this is one of the techniques from the toolkit as well, is to put yourself into the shoes of the other person and think, why do they hold these beliefs? Because I know there are people who have beliefs that to me are abhorrent, but they genuinely believe them. So they must have some reason for that. So trying to understand that, I think, is very important, and to sort of have a broad view of different people's opinions, not just the people who agree with what you think. Reinforcing that.
Mm-hmm. And also another thing that strikes me is just like the not just the people who make the content. So if we're still talking about online content, it's not just the agendas of the people making the content, but also just the way that the platform itself works. So you mentioned algorithms.
Yeah.
Exactly. A lot of the time, what's going on is that if you're on a platform, that platform just wants to hold your attention and keep you engaged in a sort of very emotional way. And so that might be what's going on. That you've got to remember that the platform is essentially trying to hold your attention. That's because your attention is a commodity to them, because they get advertising revenue, and so on. And so it's worth remembering that every time you're on, if you just automatically pick up your phone and look at whichever platform it is, whatever social media or video streaming platform that you end up on, the platform is also kind of like working some kind of magic on you, in a sense, just to keep you there. So it's an interesting landscape that we find ourselves in these days, where we do have to learn these different sorts of, we do have to navigate this landscape and understand what we're dealing with. So being aware of, multimodality is a really important thing today. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did we skip any? Sorry. Go on.
And also from the point of view of being aware of these techniques as well, so that you can use them yourself as well. Because being multimodal literate isn't just about viewing and understanding what you're consuming. It's also about representing your own views and being able to create them, and sort of looking at what's happening to you and breaking that down and using it as a tool for your own communication.
So does that mean for teachers, does that mean sort of finding ways to help your learners to create online content, right?
That's right. I think it's partly helping your students to understand online content, to break it down, maybe even to the point where they're looking at what different types of camera shots are being used. Why is this person using a close-up? Why are they going to wide angle? Why are they looking over the person's shoulder at the person who's speaking? There are all these different kind of camera techniques that a cameraman will use. So we can look at those and break them down and give students projects that involve them, recreating something, so that they can create maybe something like a digital narrative of an issue that's important to them, that they can share it and they can make that look professional and do it in a very kind of aware way.
Yeah, we've all got to become sort of like film directors. We've got to understand, for example, what happens when you add certain music. Like, for example, if I just added some sort of maybe slightly sad or serious sounding music to this conversation, it would totally change the whole tone of this conversation. It would sound a lot more kind of dramatic and worrying, like this is something that everyone needs to be deeply concerned about. Or, it would just like add in this emotion into the mix. So
music's a very powerful medium for kind of, and one that we don't think about. We're totally unaware of it while we're watching a film or watching a video. We know it's going on, but we don't think about how it's being used. quite often, and that's a really good point. Or if you added canned laughter and had people laughing after everything I said, that would have a different impact as well, because all these kind of sound effects come in as well.
Yeah, so many films that we watch and TV series that we watch, they start to play certain emotional music, essentially to tell the audience how they're supposed to feel in that moment. And
that's right.
We don't really notice a lot of the time, unless it's done badly. If it's done badly, then it's like really obvious and very jarring, and it becomes cheesy or sort of unoriginal or something. But when it's done effectively, like for example, take Star Wars as an example. I mean, the music is, we don't always think about it, but it's sort of almost like 50% of the message, really. Otherwise, it's just some sort of spaceships sort of flying through a kind of fairly sketchy special effects, but with that music, it turns it into this incredibly epic sort of fairy tale almost. It's very powerful.
And almost anyone who's been to see Star Wars the minute you mention it, can hum that tune in their head, can't they? You know the tune. And that's another interesting thing. Do you remember the credits of Star Wars? They had this kind of, as they came down at a kind of angle. There was Star Wars at the top, and the credits scrolled at a kind of angle. And that's something that you can reuse, and it kind of references something within the culture. So that's an aspect of multimodality as well. Is that isn't just that, okay, I'm putting up credits and they're going like that. And by doing that, you're kind of referencing Star Wars and making some kind of connection there. So there's a reason why someone would do that.
Intertextuality, they used to call it when I studied media studies. That's intertextuality. So if you, at the beginning of my video, if I had like a text coming up the screen, like at the beginning of Star Wars, it would suddenly, what does that say? It suggests, well, it's comedy, but also it suggests that what you're about to see is an epic narrative about English teaching in this case. Did we skip any of those five questions?
There was one other question, and that, which is a good one to think about as well, and quite an important one, and that's looking at what values or lifestyle points are being represented, or what are being left out. Often when we see videos, if you look, for example, at often sort of business videos or something like that, you'll find that all the people within it are white, all are wealthy. What does that say? What's being left out there? And what's being implied? Or through social media, people are trying to convince you of things that you need in your life in order to be happy. They're showing this particularly luxurious lifestyle as though that's something you should be, aspiring to. So people are trying to sort of influence your value system through the kinds of things that you see. And I think it's important to think about that and sort of question, okay, what values is this video promoting? What are they trying to make me believe?
I wonder what values this particular video or podcast episode is trying to promote, Nick. It just makes me think now about what is the version of the world that I'm promoting. What's my agenda? What's my secret agenda, everyone?
Exactly. And look, what am I trying to promote? I've got a jacket on. It's quite a smart jacket. I've got a black roll neck sweater because I'm talking about technology. So I'm making connection to Steve Jobs with, a sense of authority there. So these things we're trying to communicate something with them. If I was on here in my Hawaiian t-shirt instead and my straw hat, there would be a very different perception there going on.
Yes. So this is the sort of semiotics of everything. That your turtleneck sweater, it sort of makes us maybe think of Steve Jobs and his this technology guru, but also this sort of intellectual philosopher, the kind of the Parisian philosopher in a cafe or something like that as well, potentially, the kind of existentialist.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I studied as well, and that I taught is about body language and how you use your hands when you're presenting. And and if you put your hands like this with your palm, with the fingertips together, this is a kind of way of appearing knowledgeable. This is a way to communicate that you're knowledgeable. You're saying something really intelligent here.
Mm. You look like Sherlock Holmes as well when you put your fingertips together and rest them on your chin.
Yes, yeah,
Very deep.
I'm thinking very carefully, and also the way when we visually communicate. I noticed that you were kind of with your beard. You do that with your beard a little bit.
Stroking my beard.
If I do the same thing while you're doing it, I'm applying empathy with you, and that I'm trying to communicate empathy with you, and that we're the same, we're similar. I understand you because we're both
mirroring the same body language. Yeah, that's like a body language thing. If mirroring, so taking the same body posture as the person opposite you, it suggests that sort of complicity, kind of empathy.
That's right.
Yes, yeah. So if I stroke my beard, then you stroke your beard too, and then we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Yes, it's quite nice to stroke your beard. But what if you don't have a beard, Nick? I suppose you can just stroke your chin, or quickly grow a beard and then stroke it.
Well, you'd just be kind of feeling your chin or something like that, or you could, but imitating, the head tilt as well. The thing about tilting your head when you listen. Sympathetic head tilt.
Yeah, sympathetic head tilt. Okay, we're talking about body language too. Okay, wow, brilliant. So many different things involved in this multimodality. So I don't know what if people. So you've written this paper, which is being published by Oxford University Press. That's for the English teachers, really. And I think there's going to be a link in the description, by the way, everyone.
Great.
If you want to download the PDF and read it all. That's for the teachers, I suppose. And I do have English teachers listening to this, but also learners of English might be interested in that too, because it's an interesting topic. Is there anything else that you would recommend my listeners, my viewers to go to in order to find out more about this? Is it just the Oxford University Press paper, or is there something else?
I think at the moment it's mainly Oxford University Press who are kind of publishing and sort of disseminating information about multimodality. But I think it's something that's going to become more and more popular and I hope better understood through the paper. And it's something that teachers can get involved in, but it's something that learners can do themselves to start developing their understanding. Is like I said, just try switching off the sound and see what you understand from watching a video clip without the sound on.
If you're watching the video version of this, listeners, you'll probably just see me nodding a lot, and a lot of chin stroking.
Even that implies something, doesn't it? That nodding a lot it means you're listening. You're offering the confirmation that you listen and you understand. So there's that. There's also this thing about when somebody speaks. If you watch them speak, when they finish a sentence, they tend to drop their head a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So they're saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, and then at the end of the day, I'm going to do this." So you can actually watch and see if you can count the number of sentences they're saying or something like that.
Right.
Not the most rewarding thing, but watching, use your eyes a lot more when you're looking at videos. If students do that, sort of think about these different camera shots as well. Why is it close up? Why is it going to distance? What kind of effect is that having on my understanding of the content? Thinking about watching how people interact together. Those are things that students can do on their own. They don't need a teacher to do that, and it will help them when they listen as well. And looking at layout, looking at different layouts of websites, and thinking about the different layout and the use of colors and fonts and different kinds of text. Thinking about those things is quite useful, I think.
You got me thinking about the background of my room here where I do my episodes. Now, my audio listeners, and there are actually more people listening to the audio than the video probably. They don't have to be worried about those sorts of distractions. They can just go about their lives and just focus on the words that they can hear. But for people watching the video, obviously the background of my room, you got me thinking about that now, and just thinking, what does this all mean? What is the message that I'm attempting to convey here with this particular background?
Yeah,
I don't know, what do you think, Nick?
I can see a number of guitars. I can see what I think is sort of books on a bookshelf. Maybe I don't know if they're books or DVDs or something like that.
Books.
Does anybody still watch DVDs? Yeah. What are you conveying there? Be careful. No, but you've got some pictures on the walls as well. There's a map of the world. So all of those things, of course, say something about you. That you're interested in music, your culture. You enjoy watching film. You've got a map of the world, so you probably have a good, a wide world view. You're interested in things that are happening in other countries, and so. There's a lot of information I can pick up about you. You have a plant there, so you're probably a little bit into nature and worrying about the environment and things like that.
Trying to get some oxygen in this room, because living in the centre of a big city, oxygen can be in short supply. So try and get some plant life in here. Yeah, okay, really interesting. Whereas for you, it's just a white background. There's just your shadow there. I guess this is the sort of minimalism.
Yeah, I'm keeping things really distraction-free. I want people to focus on what I'm saying. I'm wearing the smart clothes to try and look professional, and so I'm trying to convey that that sort of vision or voice of some kind of authority. That this is someone you can believe. This is someone who's believable. Yeah, because I've got my wisdom hands up now with my fingertips together and pointing upwards. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah, maybe I need to strip away all of these things so that people will actually listen to me instead of just wondering about which books I've got on my bookshelf. All right. Really interesting to talk to you, Nick. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this conversation.
Well, it's been great. Thank you. It's nice to come and talk about these things and to share them, and also to sort of hear what you have to say, because you've got some really good viewpoints and perspectives on this as well. So that's really useful.
All right. Okay. Great. Well, great. Have a lovely day, and best of luck with all the new projects that are coming up.
Great. Thanks, and hope people enjoy listening. Thanks for listening. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you again to Nick for his contribution to this episode. It was very interesting to meet him and talk to him. And how about you then, listeners? How did you manage with that conversation? Did you manage to keep up with all of that? I told you that it would get more and more interesting as the conversation went on, and also easier and easier to understand Nick as you got used to his voice and the sound from his microphone. People often write comments to me saying that they can understand me, but they often struggle to understand my guests. I think there's probably going to be I'm going to just give two main reasons for that, two possible contributing reasons for why it might be difficult to understand my guests sometimes. Reason number one is that, like I said in the introduction to this, I use a sort of a microphone setup that is fairly clear to understand, right? I've spent a lot of time sort of building up my audio setup. So I speak into a fairly good quality microphone that's designed for broadcasting your voice. It's designed for making podcasts or radio. And so I've developed a fairly clear audio sound. So that definitely helps. So you don't hear a lot of reverberation. My voice doesn't echo off one of the walls in my room, so that makes it much easier for you to understand. And I've chosen to do that because obviously being comprehensible is really important. If you can, I want you to be able to understand like most of what I'm saying, so that you can actually pick out the words and you can actually clearly make sense of what I'm saying. It's obviously a really important foundation for learning English with this podcast. But then again, you also do need to get used to hearing less than perfect audio, because that's what audio is like in the real world. As I said in the introduction, when you have meetings with people, most of the time the audio is kind of echoey and there's quite a lot of reverb and it's not always completely clear. So you really do need to get used to listening to less than perfect audio as well. So, it's not the end of the world if my guests don't have the same kind of audio setup as me. Again, I don't mean to suggest that Nik's audio setup is not good enough. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. I'm just commenting on why some of my listeners are probably ready to comment that they found that a little tricky to follow. So that's one thing, that simply the sound recording setup might not be as good as mine, right? Which is fine. But that's one reason why you might find it difficult to understand my guests sometimes. And the second reason is just simply that you're less familiar with their voice. You know, if you are a regular listener to my podcast, then you listen to me speaking quite a lot, and you've kind of got used to hearing my voice, and you've tuned your ear to the way that I speak. And when you hear someone new, it's like, a new voice, and you have to kind of get used to their rhythms and the way they pronounce things and stuff like that. So it's familiarity. It's also about sound quality. Those are just a couple of reasons. But anyway, let me know what you think in response to the things you heard us talking about in this episode. Did it inspire thoughts? What kind of things were in your mind while listening to this? And, about the subject of what we were talking about. Okay. So, let me know what you think in the comments section wherever you're listening to this. By the way, if you want to read that paper from Oxford University Press, Multimodality in ELT, Communication Skills, what is it? Communication Skills for Today's Generation. If you want to read that, you can find a link in the description. It's on the Oxford University Press website. It's free, you don't have to pay for it, but you do need to register on OUP's website in order to access their library of freely published academic papers. So you do need to register, but it is free. It's mainly for teachers, that paper. It's mainly for the teachers. It's really setting out sort of certain conclusions about the way we need to consider communication and the way it's multimodal, right, in classrooms. The writers, by the way, the writers for that paper. So I should mention the main writers of this paper, or at least the experts who were consulted in the writing of this paper. So Kieran Donaghy, Sylvia Karastathy, and Nik Peachey are the three main names listed. Okay, so they... I just wanted to mention that. So then, here we are. It's Tuesday, the 6th of February. The last episode that I published was the one about getting 1 million subscribers on YouTube, where I reacted live to the number changing to 1 million, including a recording I made with my daughter at the dinner table. And I have to say, in the last, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, over the last 4 or 5 days, I've just received so many comments from listeners, and they've all been lovely. And that's really great and really encouraging. People have basically been writing, "Congratulations, you deserve it." That's the main point that people are making. And also, some people have written more detailed comments, explaining how my podcast has been helpful, explaining what it means to them. And I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for taking the time to write to me, to tell me those things. It's very encouraging, right? It gives me a lot of motivation. It gives me a real boost. And it's just lovely to hear from my listeners. And it's lovely to know that I've got an audience out there in the world who are engaged with what I'm doing. It's great. So I'm very happy that, my podcast is popular with my audience. That's lovely. Another thing that people often write is keep going. Yeah, don't worry, I'm going to keep going. I don't have any plans to stop anytime soon. I don't know when I'll ever stop doing this podcast, if I ever do. I mean, obviously I will at some point. I'll have to, right? Because nothing lasts forever. But I don't have I don't sort of plan to stop doing this at any time soon. In fact, I'd love to be able to keep doing this as long as possible because I do really enjoy this. So yeah, no plans to stop, and I'll just carry on as I have been for as long as I can. But yeah, very nice to see so many comments from people I think I'd never even seen before, names I'd never heard before, names I'd never seen before, just listeners who I guess previously were just ninjas who decided to come out of the shadows just to write to me on this momentous occasion, and then sort of slipped back into the shadows probably. But it was great to read your messages. I would respond to them all, but I just, obviously I can't. I think at this point on the YouTube version there is something like 650 comments on that episode, which is a lot more than normal. Like the ratio of views to comments, the number of comments is very high on that video, just because I guess people have decided to respond to this milestone. I got one comment which I am going to read out, and I'm going to call this a comment from a penguin. So if you remember, with my daughter, we started talking about the 7 continents in the world, because recently at school she's been learning the 7 continents, and she's been singing this song about the 7 continents. Like, we've got Africa, Asia, North and South America, Europe, Antarctica, and finally Australia. And I said, imagine there's just people all around the world listening to this podcast. Probably not in Antarctica though, because it's just snow and penguins. And then I joked about how maybe it's all penguins. Maybe that's why the number of subscribers has shot up, because the penguins suddenly got an internet connection, and the penguins have been learning English, and eventually they're gonna take over the world because they've learned English. Okay, very silly. But anyway, I said I probably don't have any listeners in Argentina. I don't have any listeners in Antarctica. I definitely have listeners in Argentina. Hello. But I said I probably don't have any listeners in Antarctica except for penguins. And then I got this comment, which I'm calling a comment from a penguin. So it goes like this. I think the commenter is called Daniel. Luke, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. This is the first time I write a comment on your channel. You see, a ninja coming out of the shadows. I'm from Argentina. Hello. Hola. Hola. ¿Cómo estás? I'm from Argentina, and let me answer one question that you asked in this video with your daughter. Yes, there are people who listen to you in Antarctica. I was one of those people. I worked there for 2 years, and in my second Antarctic campaign, I met one wonderful and beautiful person. Now I have the privilege of calling her my wife. How lovely. The only way to communicate was in English. And I hadn't spoken English before, so you can imagine how hard it was for me. This is a beautiful story, isn't it, listeners? This is not a penguin. This is a person called Daniel. I'm assuming. Maybe it is a penguin, but it's probably not, is it? Let's be honest. Anyway, so Daniel was working in Argentina, probably doing some sort of research out there. Argentina, no, in Antarctica. Probably doing some research out there, and he met a girl. He fell in love with her, but the only way he could communicate with her was in English. And that was very difficult. He continues, you helped me a lot. I practiced every day with your videos, making their transcripts and learning pronunciation. I'm still learning, and I have a long way ahead to achieve the level I need. So I hope your videos keep accompanying me in this journey. Congratulations for the 1 million subscribers. Well, congratulations to you, Daniel, for, I guess, improving your English to the point where you were actually able to, what shall I say, seduce this woman who you now call your wife and maintain a relationship with her in English. You're welcome. It's always nice to know that my podcasts are really helping people in all sorts of different ways, not just like communicate in business situations, but to speak the language of love as well. So congratulations to you as well, Daniel. And what a nice message. So in fact, there are people in Antarctica and Argentina who are listening to this podcast, not just penguins, but actual human beings as well. I could share a bunch of other comments I received in response to the last episode, but I think I'm going to leave it here. But thank you very much anyway for your supportive and encouraging words that so many of you wrote, and in fact continue to write, because every time I check my YouTube studio or check the comments section on my website, I can see more and more comments arriving, which is just so nice. That is great. I think I'm going to stop now. I'm going to stop here. So thank you very much for listening. Oh, no. There were some other things I was thinking about. Because I felt like I needed to comment on some of the things that Nik Peachey and I said in this conversation, right? Because we started talking about the semiotics of everything. I mean, the way that everything symbolizes something, right? The non-verbal communication, and how everything sends out a message. I made comments about that at the beginning, about sort of, as a teacher, how I consider these things. But I also want to now just consider that as a podcaster, because we started talking about my room. And I wanted to just say that after this conversation, I started thinking about my podcasting room and decided that I really wanted to make it a bit more minimal. I was also influenced a little bit, or inspired by Nik's background, because Nik had a simple white background, completely white, and also stood up while doing the interview, which was great. I've always wanted to stand up to do podcasts. In fact, I used to stand up quite a lot when I was just recording audio episodes. I would often stand up or walk around my apartment and record like that. I've also done episodes where I'm walking around the city as well, or going on walks in other places. But most of the time I'm sitting in this room. But it made me think about the background. And I don't know if video viewers have noticed, but I've tried to sort of reduce the amount of visual noise in the background. There's still quite a lot of detail behind me, but I've tried to make it a bit more minimal. So, for example, I've the picture frames behind me, they used to be black. They're now white. They're exactly the same. They're just white, because I thought that maybe was a little bit less visually noisy, if that makes sense. I've reduced the number of things behind me. I've removed stickers, I've removed pictures and various things like that, just to try and keep the background as simple as possible. For a while, and this is after also I did that episode about the Beatles, Now and Then, which I recorded at home in my living room with a basic white background, because we've got a wall which we haven't put anything on yet. And so I had a white background. I actually really enjoyed having a clear white background, the sort of minimal visuals. I actually really enjoyed that. And for a while I was thinking, what am I going to do with my room? I need to install a curtain or something in the background. Who knows? I might still do that. I was thinking of if I could put up some kind of curtain behind me, so it would just be a simple white curtain. But then I thought, well, it might look like I'm in a hospital, like I'm podcasting from a hospital bed or something with a weird white hospital curtain behind me. I don't know. But anyway, I've tried to make it a bit more minimal. And also, I was thinking about what values am I communicating through this podcast? Right? What are the values I'm communicating? And like, corporations or companies think about this, don't they? They think about the values that they communicate in everything they do, in their branding and all that stuff. What are the values that I'm communicating through this podcast? I don't know, really. I always sort of keep that fairly subliminal, meaning I don't always think about it overtly. It's just more natural. I just try and keep it natural and authentic. But I suppose, I'm trying to basically make this podcast personal, to show that language learning is a personal thing. So I always try to keep it fairly personal, rather than doing some sort of impersonal, business-like show, right? You know what I mean? Like some of those materials that you can use to learn languages, that you don't get the sense that there's a person's life behind it. And so, but I think that our lives are, that our personal lives are completely wrapped up in language learning. So I suppose I'm trying to reflect that. But otherwise, I don't know, something genuine. I'm trying to be genuine and authentic. For example, I designed this room so it looks fairly nice on camera, but also I design and decorate my room in the way that I want it to look. I mean, I spend a lot of time in this room, so I want it just to be in a place that I like. And so that's a large part of it. Also, it's functional to an extent. For example, you can see I've got guitars on the walls. Now they're not just there for show, but they're there because I don't really have anywhere else to put them. And the wall is definitely the best place to put a guitar. It's definitely the most convenient place because you can just grab it off the wall and just play, whenever I want. I can just grab it and have a go and quite simply put it back. And the guitars are then out of the way. If you lean them against the walls, they fall over, they fall on the floor. So just putting them up on the wall is the most convenient place to put them. We don't have a lot of space at home for all the guitars. And this is, to be honest, where I'm going to play them and record with them and stuff. So that's why the guitars are up. But also the guitars look cool, don't they? They look nice. I love the shape of a guitar. It's a beautiful thing. So they're quite nice decorative items, but it's also functional. It's just the most convenient and suitable place to keep them. I don't know. I don't know about the rest of it in terms of the values that I'm trying to communicate. I'll let you decide, but you can tell me. I mean, what do you think? What are the values that I communicate through this podcast? Right? I mean, it's, something about goodwill, being interested in people, humour, the importance of humour, and not taking life too seriously. I think that humour for me is a thing that helps to create a good atmosphere, a friendly atmosphere. Anyway, you can tell me, what do you think are the values that I communicate through my podcast? What does my podcast stand for? And here we go. This is the end now. This is the proper end. But I'm curious to know what you think in response to this episode. Leave your comments in the comments section and I will speak to you in the next episode. But for now, it's just time to say goodbye. Bye. 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 Bye.